So welcome, everybody. Good morning. This is a crystal glaze primer, which means we are going to look at all of the basic steps that you have to add on to your normal pottery making process in order to work with crystalline. The way that I hope this session will work is that we get a little bit inspired by the fun results you're seeing. I get you guys inspired to maybe go out and try it. And the things that we're presenting today will sort of get you further along in experimenting with crystalline glaze. Our studio started experimenting with it about 3 years ago. And the way that it happened was we started firing, we're normally a cone 10 reduction studio at higher fire. And we started doing a monthly cone 10 oxidation firing. And when I started thinking about what else could we be doing besides oil spot and some other interesting cone 10 oxidation glazes, the first thing that came to my head is, hey, oxidation, crystalline, we can experiment with this. And
it is cone 10.
It is. So these on the table are probably closer to cone 9, somewhere between cone 9 and 10. And these are, everything you're seeing on the table is done in our electric kiln. But you can get reasonably good results with a platter like this, even in a gas kiln, as long as it's fired in oxidation. And in the gas kiln, if there's enough mass in there, pots, and slow cooling, you'll get plenty of crystals forming on, these syrupy, glossy surfaces, which is great. So anyway, that was the genesis of it. I started looking at how to do crystalline and learning more about the process of making the catch basin, formulating the glaze, getting the firing schedule right. And over the last few years, in teaching the classes and having students be the guinea pigs, we've developed probably maybe 8 to 10 glazes that we really like. And we can get 15 students through the process with minimal damage to the kilns. And so hopefully, and shelves, it's just a disaster. Like week to week, we kill a kiln shelf with the firings. And so we charge extra for the crystal class because of that, a little bit extra. Anyway, the overview for this session, what we're going to try and do is we'll go over the first page on the handout, which gives you an overview of the process. And then we're going to switch gears and walk over to the wheel and do the next few pages in the handout, which are all the hands-on things that I can show you physically how to do catch basins, trimming, glazing, and separating a piece from the bottom, from the catch basin when it's done, as well as grinding the bottom. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at the handout over here, and we'll just give you basic pointers now. Ask as many questions as you want. We're a small group. It's intimate, so you can jump in at any time. I'm going to try and give you just a walkthrough of what's on page 1, and feel free to jump in with any discussion about this. So what are crystalline glazes? Basically, they are cone 910 porcelain glazes. And we recommend using either B-mix or porcelain as a clay. They are very, 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 very runny in the kiln. So the major process change is that you have to have the basin to catch the excess glaze, and you need to think about the thickness of the glaze when you're putting it on the pot. And we'll do a glaze demo a little bit later. I'll show you how to do that. If you've worked with glazes at all, so here's a minor techie thing.
50% frit, that would probably account for the runniness.
It's 50% frit, 25% silica, and 25% zinc. And that tells you a lot about it, right? So it's very runny because the frit is mainly a flux. And zinc oxide is in there because the way that the crystals form, which is going to happen during cooling, is that you have these zinc silicates forming in the surface. And you need a lot of zinc in the glaze. And zinc is something that we don't normally put in high amounts in a glaze. It's not even a popular flux anymore, at least for cone 10 gas. If there's any reduction, that amount of zinc in a glaze will give you pitting and bubbling. So with that amount, you have to fire it in electric kiln or at least be in oxidation. Okay, but it's important to have all that zinc in there, otherwise you won't get the crystals. So there's a little comparison there to a standard cone 10 glaze. You can look at that at your leisure. We use a lot of different colorants in crystalline. Let me just see if I can show you examples. Iron as a colorant will give you golds. And so this glaze, which we call in our studio 60-40 iron manganese, has like 1% iron and 1% manganese in it. And we get gold crystals on a goldy tan background. So iron is a great colorant if you want to move a glaze toward golds and tans or get gold crystals. Iron or even just rutile will give you that. Cobalt's going to give you blue. Manganese by itself tends to give you these sort of lavender pink tones. And so some popular crystalline glazes have anywhere from 1% to 8% manganese in them. And you'll get pink backgrounds and sometimes silver or gold crystals depending on what else is in the glaze. This one we call, what is this? Periwinkle Moon. It's got manganese and a little bit of cobalt. And I think it also has probably a little bit of rutile in it, which gives help to the crystals. So titanium is an important ingredient as well. Periwinkle Moon, I don't know. We have fun coming up with glaze names for all these things, so I can give you the actual names for them. But, you know,
When you
it's...
say rutile, are you talking about the oxides?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So rutile is a glaze ingredient. It's often used to make glazes more opaque or stringy or kind of runny looking and give them movement. In a crystal glaze, it's a source of iron, and rutile also has titanium. And so it's going to produce golds and help with crystal formation. Okay. Other colorants that we use, nickel and copper. I don't know where my nickel sample is. I'll dig it out from my bin. Copper is going to give you greens. So this glaze, for example, has 4% copper in it and probably 4% rutile. And so you get a beautiful green background and you get gold crystals sitting on that background. This just came out yesterday and I was just about, wow. And I got the lid off, which is like a huge bonus. So if I happen to actually get it unstuck from the basin and smoothed out, it's a big win. So far, the jury is still out. Anyway, it's exciting though. Okay, so that's a little bit about glaze formulation. Some things to avoid. I stay away from chrome and mason stains. Chrome as a colorant usually gives you green, but in a crystal glaze, it tends to matte out the surface. It mutes the crystals. You get almost nothing. You get like a blah army green background. So stay away from chrome. Mason stains, you think, it's wonderful. It should be great in oxidation. They also tend to matte out glazes. And the colorants, if you're going to use a mason stain, should go underneath the crystal glaze, maybe as a slip or as an engobe that you spray on the pot before you put a crystal glaze. And there are a lot of potters who use mason stains successfully in crystal, but it's done either as a slip or an engobe before the glaze goes on. Just to know. All right, some other basics. Crystals grow in the glaze during cooling. You have to fire the pots up to whatever the melting temperature is of the glaze. For us, we have a cone 8 electric kiln, and we're using almost cone 10 glazes. So what we do is we take it up to 2265 and hold it there for about 45 minutes. And then that melts the glaze to the right viscosity, and then we start the controlled cooling. And that would be the next part about it, that it's the cooling that really gives you the crystals, right? Crystals are going to grow randomly. You have no way to predict where they are. There's no way to paint something on the pot surface and say, I want my crystal here. Or, I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. It's not even close.
This is so my kind of firing.
It's you get what you get, and even when you think you know what you're doing, pots come out of the kiln and they may have like one boop of a crystal and nothing else, and you go, what happened? Luckily, you can refire these things. So like this platter has been through 3 times, and on the 3rd try, it came out great. I kept adding a tiny bit more glaze and a tiny bit more glaze and hoping for a different, slightly different cooling schedule, and it's awesome. So you just never know. The other thing that happens, and this is a common misconception, if you do refire a pot, all of these crystals in the surface melt back into the glaze, and you will get an entirely new set of crystals during cooling. So it's not additive. They're not going to stay there, right? It all melts back in. And then when the pot starts cooling again, if you have enough glaze and it all didn't run down here, then you get a new pattern of crystals. So refiring is great, but you can end up worse.
So if you refire, you probably need to paint a lot more on the top because you've already had the top glaze.
Absolutely. So the usual procedure is you're going to add a ton of glaze to the top. The pots are already fired. You got to heat them up. You got to add a layer, heat them up again, add another layer to the top, and probably do that 3 or 4 times, and then they go back in the kiln for a refire. So
Then you would really have a pool in the bottom.
So that's another issue, right? You have to watch how much glaze is in the bottom. This one's unstuck already. So for example, if this is already starting to overflow in the catch basin, I either can't reglaze it or I have to put another basin underneath. Sometimes what we do is we'll just stick a bisque bowl underneath the pot, and we have a lot of extras in the studio, stick a bisque bowl underneath it, and that way if it overflows the catch basin with all that additional glaze, at least it's going into the bowl. So
what's the white?
but that's the other consideration, right? You have to watch the bottom if you're going to put it back in.
So the bottom of that is a dark blue, and does that have something to do with the glaze?
It does. So crystal glazes, when they are thick, tend to be dark blue or black. And what you can see, for example, this platter has one glaze on it. This is our famously named mystery blue glaze. And I apply it as sort of a single thickness, and then I add another layer to the rim of the platter. It all flows down toward the center during the firing because there's a curve. And where the glaze is thicker, what color? Yeah, blue to black. And where the glaze is thicker, this will be an important point for later, you generally get fewer crystals. Where it's of a medium thickness, you get the best profusion of crystals. And where the glaze is thin, 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 you get a lot of tiny, tiny crystals spreading over the whole surface. So usually too thin, you'll get a pot where it's just covered and it looks like fish scale. And that can be a sign that you need to add more glaze.
So the shape of the pot determines the pattern.
Now, I love this though, because if you put a nice curve to the platter, by design, you're going to get a gradation of color from one glaze. So I'll get this dark center, it looks like I'm looking into the universe, I'll get a few stars, and then here, bigger planets and things happening, and then kind of a creamy exterior.
So that's all one of the same glaze?
One glaze, and then I put like a black glaze on the back side and rim, just to frame it. Let's see, where are we? We talked about firing and titanium dioxide. Let me just give you the, so we just went over glaze thickness a little bit, so we're up to one more ingredient. Titanium is super important in crystal glazes, so anywhere from 1 to 8% you need it in the glaze to help form the crystals. There are very few crystal glazes that don't need it. A nickel glaze might not need it, but pretty much everything else does. And so the recipes that I have on the back of the handout give you an idea of how much titanium is needed for different glazes. So you've got 3 recipes on the back there. Now let's see, let's talk about cooling and electric kilns. So what do you guys know about crystal glaze and cooling? Anybody has done it before? You've done it before a little bit. You have to hold it for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours or even more. and you have to hold it at the right temperature. So finding that can be challenging. And you might do several firings with a lot of tests before you know exactly where that crystal growing temperature is. The recommended range that we have come to is anywhere between 1980 Fahrenheit and about 2050. And that means that you're taking your electric kiln up to, cone 8 or 9 or 10, 2265, dropping it as fast as you can down to the crystal growing temperature at 1980 and holding it there for maybe an hour or two, and you'll get crystals. And if you move the kiln up and down in temperature, you can get halos around the crystals. So we'll look at the firing schedule at the end. Halos are kind of cool depending on the right ingredients. You get these nice rings around the crystals. They look awesome. They're like perfectly framed. And if you have the schedule going, it's all done by the electric kiln, right? Simple. Yeah.
That tumbler shape, was that up and down also? Is that a halo of the crystal? Or
Yes. So this one is up and down also, and they almost look like agates. They look like stone, right? So it depends on what's in the glaze, but when they do that, it's that's the best. Or you even get just a round one, and it's got layers of gold and halos. They look like sand dollars or amoebas or what have you. You can pass that around if you want to look at that.
What was the crystal growing temperature that you actually said?
It's 1980 to about 2050 or 2060, and we have a schedule for you on the back page that you can use. Let's move along. Let's talk about electric kilns for a minute. So the reason to use an electric kiln, first and foremost, the atmosphere is going to be neutral to oxidation. You'll get the brightest colors. So we find even if we use the gas kiln in what we think is oxidation, we get much more muted colors. We get more metallic colors in gas. So if you want bright, shiny, candy-like glazes, go with the electric kiln. It's also the easiest way to control the cooling schedule and go up and down to get the rings around the crystals. Now, elements. So the story of my electric kiln, it's a workhorse. I've had it for 18 years, and the very first time I changed the elements was maybe after 5 crystal runs 2 years ago, right? So why is that?
Does that have something to do with it?
Crystalline glaze firings are extremely rough on electric kilns. They are long firings. So our typical firing takes anywhere from 16 to 18 hours, start to finish. And you'll notice from the schedule, that's going as fast as the kiln can go up to the top temperature. It's the cooling schedule that really beats up the elements, because the kiln is holding at a high temperature and it's moving up and down at like half an hour to 1 hour intervals to make those rings. So anywhere from 20 to 30 firings. What I notice with our kiln is that as soon as my normal 16 to 18 hour firing time increases to 20, 21, 22 hours, it's time to change the elements. And the results start getting a little screwy, right? So some are better and then some things are worse because the kiln is struggling to get to temperature. So if you're going to do this, recommend you get some good elements, get a cone 10 kiln, wash your kiln shelves because overflowing catch basins is a reality. So in our experience, students especially put too much glaze on the pot and they make the catch basin too small or with not a deep enough well. So if you look at the design of this thing, part of your strategy is to make enough space in here to really catch the glaze. And if it's too shallow, or my other favorite one, not well made and there's a crack in the bottom, or, it's all happened in our kiln. So crack in the bottom means all of this glaze puddles right out around the catch basin, and that thing is stuck to the shelf forever. And if you try to grind it, you just take apart the shelf. So, all right, we'll talk about catch basins and making those. So I recommend...
With a lot of kiln wash on the shelf?
Well, with a lot of kiln wash, you're in better shape. But, kiln wash is not a miracle. It's just a helper. So, okay, food safety. Our testing shows that they are not food safe. So these are decorative platters. These are decorative vessels. You can put flowers in them. You could serve dry foods in them, but the crystals themselves are the culprits. So crystals, when they form on the surface, are the metallic oxides in the glaze. That's your iron, manganese, cobalt, and copper, whatever's in there. And there's no glossy glaze surface over them, right? The normal thing that keeps all those colorants in a glaze is a really good, glossy, hard surface. And the crystals themselves are growing at the top, and there's no glaze over them. Often the crystals will also feel a little bit rough compared to the rest of the glaze. So it's the crystals that are the issue. The glazes themselves are more or less okay. They're a little bit soft for cone 10 glazes, so we just use the blanket statement, not really food safe. If you're gonna make mugs, put the glaze on the outside, put a liner glaze on the inside, something that's nice and stable.
So they're waterproof, but they're not food safe.
Waterproof but not food safe, or I wouldn't put them in the dishwasher either, right? So dishwasher is gonna tend to be more, it's abrasive in there, right? You have water crashing around, you have detergent in the water, and it's gonna mar the surface or get it cloudy, or potentially change the color. May change it for the better, but it's gonna change it over time.
In the class I took, I made 4 tumblers. I did the white and the inside and crystals. And we could put it in the dishwasher and they have
They're doing okay?
it.
Okay. So far,
I think
yeah, I would hand wash them if they're crystal, just because the surface is so soft. Yeah. Okay, talked about food safety. Let's go on to the interesting stuff. Are you ready for actual hands-on stuff? I anticipated about half an hour for the beginning, the overview. So I think we could move over this way and I'll show you about some of the steps for trimming, making catch basins and things like that. You guys doing okay?
Your foot is always flat, I noticed.
We'll go talk about that. Yeah. Flat-footed for crystal. Easier. Here is what we're going to do. So the next section in the handout is what's different about the throwing or trimming process. So let's just walk through some of those points. One of the main ones is about clay. We talked about using a white stoneware clay or porcelain. Another one is about form. Forms should tend to be more smooth forms, simple. Round forms work really well. Even just basic cylinder forms that taper in work very well. Complicated forms with lots of cuts and or texture tend to get overwhelmed by the glaze. So the glaze will actually pool in those areas and you'll get some accenting, right? So where it pools, you'll generally get darker lines and things. Texture can work, but I advise students to stay away from texture and just try to get the glaze itself to show, which is the main event for the pot. And as far as trimming goes, we usually like a straight line to the foot. So I'm going to show how to trim a narrow neck base. Here I go. I made a couple of these yesterday. We'll see if I can get them off their bats. And often I find myself using a chuck for narrow neck pieces. That's pretty typical. And when I am trimming, I go a little bit differently. I'm looking for basically a straight line to the foot and not an accentuated foot rim. I can actually draw that for you a little bit better than telling you about it. I'll certainly show it to you with how it works. With normal foot, of course I'm a terrible artist here. Let's see. That one's a little better. Normally at the bottom of a vase, it's a pretty ugly vase, you think about having like a foot rim and there's a line of demarcation here and maybe a foot of some kind. And I'm really fond of doing like a pushed out foot rim, because the normal glazes that I use are ash glazes, very runny things in the studio, cone 10 reds and purples and things. And so I like a little catch down here for regular glaze. This generally doesn't work out as well with crystalline because you'll have the glaze pooling here and then spilling over that surface. So we want to get rid of that and have the line of the form come down and then straighten out a little bit. So you want to leave room at the bottom to have the foot sort of straighten out. It can flare just a little bit, but basically straight, because you're going to marry that form to a catch basin. And you want that area of connection to be flush and smooth, and you want the glaze during the firing, as it's flowing down the pot, to just fall right over that connection and into the well, right, into the moat. So trimming is a little bit different. Bless you. You can actually, here's my good marker.
Nature's a beast.
Yeah. It's actually easier, I think, for crystalline, because the first thing you can start with is a totally flat foot, right? So just trimming up the side and then leaving it flat on the bottom is valid. In fact, it's the easiest way when you're just getting started, because once the pieces are removed from the catch basin, all you have to do is stick them on the grinding disc and take off all the excess and leave it flat. You don't have to hold the piece at different angles or work on the edges very much. Flat, 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 super easy. So let me center this and I'll just show you how that works, and then I want to show you also how to smooth the sides. There we go. All right, so long sweeping motions. Take off all the chunky stuff. And to get the foot to, so I'm looking at it now upside down, to get it to kind of straighten out like we're talking about on the board, I'm going to aim for this area here as the place where I tighten it in the most. So I bring the tool up, and then I want to cut in right about there as much as I can, and then maybe use a curved side of the tool to have that sort of straighten out and come more vertically. Do you guys see that happening? A little bit? My pot's moving around on me a little bit. All right, so there's that straight bit. Blending of the curve. If you want to get rid of trimming lines, which you do in crystal, you want a faster wheel speed and a slower motion up the side. Sometimes a better trim tool helps too. That's looking about right to me. There we go. And once we're done trimming, if I want to just do flat bottom like this, basically done with the base, I then take a little bit of time to smooth the sides. Let me get a water and a rib. The reason you want to smooth the sides is that crystal glaze tends to show all of your texture. It can show trimming lines and grit, and so a little bit of moisture on your white clay along with a soft rubber rib or an aluminum rib, and you can basically take out all the trim lines and do your final shaping. So smooth, smooth, smooth is better crystal results. Maybe one more. Okay. There we go. Now I must be done because the pot's coming loose. All right, so this pot basically has a smooth curve from the shoulder down to the foot, and then maybe half an inch before the foot, we turn it so that it's going to have a little vertical bit. It's way better than an accentuated foot, and it's also better. I'll show you one other drawing now that I have my good pen. It's also better than something that just ends kind of round with a narrow foot. This is a tough one to do for crystal. I see it all the time from students. They want to continue the very round shape at the bottom of the pot and then marry a catch basin to it. Right? Think catch basins whenever you're trimming. And I want you to see the connection between the two, right? If this is mostly round and then just kind of flattens out here, you'll have an area right here where glaze will collect. And if the catch basin is a little bit too wide or bigger than the absolute bottom of your pot, you'll end up with a whole ridge of glaze right in there all the way around the pot. And when you go to separate them, it tears up the side of the pot, right? So you end up with chipping. So I really try to tell folks, make sure that your pot comes down, you straighten it out, and have a little bit of a vertical area, and then you can make a better catch basin and a little bit more easy release. Okay, there we go. So that's a bit about the trimming. And the next thing I want to show you is how to make a catch basin. So catch basin, pretty easy. It's a double wall pot. It takes about a pound of clay. And it also takes some math. Who has an iPhone or a phone with a calculator on it that's handy? Anybody? Anybody? So first thing we need to know, I guess in general, is that with the foot rim, you're going to be adding 6% to the diameter of the foot to make a catch basin for it. So if I measure this and this is 100 millimeters across, then this measurement, as I throw the piece, will need to be 106 millimeters. Okay. If I'm using a pot that's already bisqued and I made it a month ago and now I decide I want to do crystal for it, I can still throw a catch basin for it, but I'm going to use 8% as my shrinkage measure, right? So the 6% is basically the difference in shrinkage between freshly thrown and leather hard, and 8% is the difference between freshly thrown and bisque, okay, roughly. All right, so let me measure this. Who's got the calculator? Marcy does. Awesome. Make sure you have a ruler that has millimeter measure on it. Is way easier than dealing with inches. So my foot rim is 92. So if we do 92 times 1.06, 92 times 1.06, that is the measure I need. Okay, 92 times 1.06. What was it? 97.5. Okay, so I'm going to throw the catch basin with 97.5 as the diameter. Most likely what I'm going to do is get somewhere in the range of 97 or 98. That's the reality. And then you will notice that on a millimeter measure, that's a tiny difference. Okay? If you're going to err on the side, one side or the other, err on the smaller side. The reason is, overall, we want the catch basin lip, whatever's going to marry to this pot, to be exactly the same in diameter or a tiny bit smaller is better. When they are a tiny bit larger, that's when you get the plucking issue and the problems. So if you're going to err on one side or the other, do it on the small side. So I'll try for 97. All right, let's put this to the side. Okay, I'm starting with somewhere around a pound of clay. So I'm going to center this clay, so you guys can see. While I'm doing the basics here just to make a pot, Do you guys see this thing up here? Brilliant idea. So if you're looking for things to test crystalline glaze with, or things that do not require a catch basin, a candlestick is fantastic. Oops. Because it's got the basin built right in. All right, here we go. So with the catch basins, you still have to center the clay. You're working with precision in mind. And in our teaching of crystal pots at the studio, we give everyone studio reclaim to make catch basins. The reclaim or recycled clay isn't exactly the same as what you're using for the pots, but they end up being close enough in size that it doesn't matter in terms of shrinkage. And it's a good use for recycled clay, and it saves you on using fresh B-mix or porcelain for something you're going to throw away. So recycled clay works great. I open it up. I compress because I don't want the bottom to crack and leak. And then here is my steps for this. So to make a double-walled pot, part of what you're doing is splitting this thick piece of clay into an inner lip and an outer lip. And so I'm going to gather this up, and I'm going to check basically that I've got a thick ring of clay, it's compressed, and then I look at the measure for this thing, wherever I put my ruler. I'm going for 97, and so I want my 97 to be kind of in the middle of the ring. Right now my ring is too small, right? So from here to here, it's too small. I need it to be wider. Widen that out a little bit, compress it down, and measure. So this is just a rough idea, right? So if my ring really needs to be 97, now I'm looking good because the measure from my index finger to index finger is now kind of in the middle of that thick outer bit of clay. And then I split the rim. And you can use a tool to do it, or you can use your fingertip. Doesn't really matter. I'll use a stick, and basically need some moisture, and then just push, and I'll take the edge of the tool and split this rim. Mostly it's done, okay? I'll need to check the dimensions of this. I also need to bring up the inner lip a little bit. We'll talk height of those. The inner lip should be taller than the outer lip, so I'll give it a little pull. There we go. And now I'm doing more of a final check to make sure I've got my 97. Let's see where we're at. That's basically it. It's a little wide. It's at 98. So I'm going to push it in a little bit. And then I just started doing this new trick. I use this to flatten the rim. You want a flat to flat surface, and the plastic rulers are a great way just to have this flatten out.
It's already in your hand.
It's in your hand. It's working. And then a final check. Here we go. Still a tiny bit wide. Okay. So I would call that mostly done for the inner lip, and then we do the outer lip. Moisten, get your finger under the edge, and raise it up. All right, now we need the moat. Okay, so that's coming up. I'm gonna do my old compress and a little bit of a pull. I'm looking at it for how deep is it. I'm also looking at relative height. I want the inner lip to be maybe half an inch taller than the outer lip. And the reason is, if I have to get these separated, I need room to work, especially when I'm aiming flame in there. But I want it deep enough. One tool that I use to make sure I've got good depth and that it's nice and clean is the stick. And so I put that in and make sure that the channel is cleaned up. And I also bring this in a little bit because I'm also thinking about kiln loading. So when you have 30 pots to fit in the kiln, you don't want this lip to be this wide because it will block other pots from sitting right next to it. So it's real estate, and you want to just bring that in a little bit. Shouldn't get too high, shouldn't get too narrow, but you want to keep it.
No bigger than the diameter of the pot.
Yeah, that would be ideal. So, and then, you know, in our studio, we'll reject a pot if it's taking up too much real estate and we can fit in 2 other ones. So anyway, this looks like a decent catch basin. Double check this before you wire it off. That looks good. And so that's basically it, right? A simple double-walled pot. You have inner rim about a ½ inch higher than the outer rim. And this, when it shrinks, will match this guy. If I can pick it up. All right, so it won't match right now. That looks way big. I must have mismeasured at any rate. Yeah, it's for the next one. Anyway, when this shrinks, it should match this, right, at the leather hard stage. And you can always keep them, you know, both leather hard and trim them to fit. All right, that is that. Do you guys have questions on catch basins? Anything at all? Okay. All right, let's take a look. You have lots of glaze catcher math in your handout, other examples, you had pictures, and let's take a look at the glazing process overview. So we'll go over and we'll show you how to apply glaze to the pot. I actually can bring the pots over here and do this right at my wheel. Yay, says Suzanne. Okay. Mystery blue. Do you want to see what mystery blue looks like? That was the big platter, had mystery blue on it.
That was great.
Yeah.
Dark and
And it has kind of a creamy exterior when it's on a vertical surface. So mystery blue, you probably want to know how we got the name mystery blue.
I was gonna ask you,
Yeah.
who made the mistake?
Well, it kind of is like that. So at the beginning of the March-April session, we had a bunch of leftover bluish glazes, and we just tossed them all together to clean out a whole bunch of containers. And I had a whole bunch of dark cobalt glazes that had never really worked out. I threw those into and ended up with this is actually a larger amount of crystal glaze than we normally work with. We work with it in jars.
But are you
And-
going to be able to repeat it now?
No, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It's, you know, it is what it is. And we threw them all together and it was like, wow, that's a really pretty brew. Yay. That's a big win. So everybody made pots in mystery blue this session. And we'll have it for next session because you don't use, you use a ton of glaze on the pot, but in the class anyway, you're only glazing 1 or 2 pieces per week. So, and you want to try all the other colors. But I think we can come close now. It's blue, you know, it's blue on a creamy background. We have some idea on how to get that. Speaking of testing, I was going to show you guys this. So I like to do a lot of glaze testing at Higher Fire. And to make that easy so that I don't have to throw pots all the time or throw something that looks like a pot or a candlestick, we extrude out tubes. So I'll take a whole bag of porcelain, run it through the extruder with a hollow form, and cut tubes that are maybe 7 to 8 inches. I then take our trusty reclaim clay and I roll slabs and I do a little press plate for each one. And then I have, you know, testable form with a catch basin, and they fit neatly into the kiln because they're only 4 inches wide on either side, and we run a whole bunch of tests. So the reason I like to do the tube is that on a crystal glaze, you really need height to tell you what the glaze is going to look like. They separate out, they run. And so this gives you a really good idea. The only downside that I can see in using this method is that you have to do a little bit of finishing work on the tubes. If they have little crevices and things from the extrusion process, right out of the extruder, they get little dots and things on them. It's good to spend some time and smooth it out as best you can, smooth out the lips as well so that they look a little bit better. And so you don't mistake some of the pitting on the surface from the glaze when it's really just the tube itself has a whole bunch of marks on it. So something to think about.
And you don't use the wadding to stick it on there either?
No, I mean, we just like toss them in the kiln. It's super easy, right? And I don't even glue them together.
They'll stick together just fine.
They'll be stuck eventually, yeah. Let me see which one this corresponds to. There's a fun game that you get to play when you start glazing, which is which catcher goes with which pot. That one is too big, so I'm assuming that one is going to go with this one for the afternoon. Okay, so here I am. I've matched my catcher to my pot. In process, I'm going to glaze the pot first, and then I'm going to apply a glaze catcher glue, and we'll talk about that glue and what its purpose is. And then we will marry those two together, and then they get loaded in the kiln as a unit. Okay? So let's talk about how to glaze this pot. All right. Now, if I had really been prepared, what I would have done is put the liner glaze on this last night. So when you glaze crystalline pots, put a liner glaze in it. In our studio, we use standard cone 10 glazes for liners. Part of the reason we do that is that they are usually more waterproof than a crystal glaze. Secondly, they're more stable. Thirdly, they are cheap. And if you have a lot of people doing glaze and not a lot of glaze in small jars or buckets, we use the liner glaze. The reason to put it on the night before is why? So the pot is dry, right? So bisque pots are all about absorbency. And if the pot is going to have a lot of glaze on it, as we're about to find, you want it really absorbent. And so if you put the liner glaze on 10 minutes before on a thin pot, you're a little bit screwed in getting enough glaze on there. Language. Look out. So we're going to imagine this has a liner glaze on it, and I'm going to show you how I would glaze something like this. The general strategy is for any pot, you're going to divide it into 3 sections. So you're going to put 1 coat over the entire pot. You're going to put 2 coats of glaze over the top 2/3, and then you're going to put a 3rd coat over the top. So the top needs to be 3 times the thickness as the bottom. Okay? So some potters recommend brushing and using micrometers and testing it with the micrometer. I am just not one of those potters, so it doesn't work for me as a process. I don't like that level of precision as much as I like precision on things. So I do things like mix the glaze up and put the first coat on by dipping as much as you can. It's a good start, right? I've got my 1 coat on there. We'll wipe the bottom off.
If that bucket has a lot more glaze than usual, and you usually have it in jars, you can't dip in the jars. You have to.
I will even pour out of a jar into a bowl. I should have showed that. And in a small bowl, you know what you can do with a pot like this? You can drop it into the bowl on an angle and just rotate it around in the bowl of glaze. And guess what? This thing is buoyant. And so it just floats on the surface while you turn it and coat it with glaze. It works great. Super easy and nice way to add a good thick coat. When it's dry enough to touch, turn it around and dip the top half. Okay. Actually, I should do top 2/3. Let's put a little more on. Ah, that's better. All right, am I worried about getting too much glaze on the pot? Okay, it's almost as much as you can put on, and you're working in general terms. So I don't need any more on the bottom. I've got roughly 2 coats here in the middle and 1 coat at the top. So I'm thinking of letting this dry, and then I will add more. Okay? So, and I should have thrown a thicker pot.
So now when that dries, will you go back and fill it with your white glaze?
Yeah.
Okay, your liner.
So if I end up working in this direction, Sandra is worried that this pot will not get a liner glaze on it, but it will. So you can even pour in, once the pot is fully glazed, you could pour in a 1/4 cup of your favorite liner glaze, swish it around, turn it around until it absorbs into the pot, and then leave it in there. Right? So I wouldn't pour 1/2 cup of glaze in here, but a 1/4 cup for sure I can get to stick to the whole thing. Okay. All right, so I've done my 2 dips. I'm going to do 1 more dip. I am a big believer in stirring frequently with these glazes. So one thing to know about frit-based glazes, what do? They settle out super fast. So you want to keep mixing and stirring and mixing in between every coat. If you're applying with brush, you mix constantly. Okay? And use glaze suspender. So here I am dipping the 3rd time. Glaze suspenders like the one that we have listed on our recipes on the back, the best one I think is V-gum tea. So V-gum tea is like bentonite but better. It's more pricey. It's still a clay that is a plasticizer and a glaze suspension agent, but you need less of it. You need like 0.5% of V-gum will do the job of 2% bentonite. Okay? So, and it works better. So V-gum tea, if you see it listed on our recipes, that is a glaze suspension agent. Now, I did bring brushes. I was going to show one more thing that we do, which is sometimes for your final coat, my pot is really thin, so it's taking a while to dry, but sometimes for your final coat, what you're doing is just going back around. And I go, wow, Dan said to get a thick coat on here. Okay, here I go. And I'm just brushing it on. And then you go, oh my God, look how drippy it is. That's terrible. Look at all the drips. It doesn't matter. It all disappears. So in many ways, crystalline glaze is super forgiving in that regard. Although if you don't have enough on or the cooling schedule is not right, they don't come out. But in this regard, you can really pile the glaze on the pot. Okay? And I'm usually doing my brushing on the upper half of the pot. And I just do one final coat. Now the final tricky part can be, one, this will take a while to dry because I'm doing it fast. I would usually go have a cup of coffee, come back, talk to students, let it dry, but I'm trying to show it to you all in one sequence. And if you get it on too thick, this can crackle off in the drying process. So you know you've gone too far when the glaze is sitting there for an hour and it starts to turn up like mud crackle and fall off. Got to start over. And you have too much glaze on the pot. So you dry it out, start over again. Yep. Take it to the limit. Some of the things we find too is that certain glazes, when they're in the bucket for too long or they get rehydrated, will have super high shrinkage, and that will cause that crackling off. It's almost like what happens with Shino when you cover Shino with a glaze that's not compatible with a Shino. It just falls off. So then if you see that and there's no way to get enough on the pot, time to mix a new batch. Okay?
That seems very contradictory. You said you could put as much on as you want, only don't put too much on.
Well, I'm saying get as much on as you can, and if it falls off, maybe you've gone too far.
Okay, and then when you say
Start over.
take it all away.
Yeah, just wash it off. Sink.
Okay.
But this is pretty thick, right? Would you agree that's a thick coat? Yeah.
Do that with a regular glaze.
With a regular glaze, that's too much glaze, right? You know, if you see somebody dipping 3 times, you're like, whoa, don't do that. With crystal glaze, you really want to get that much on, at least on the top of the pot. Okay, so we're going to let this dry for a second, and let's talk about glaze catcher glue. How much time do I have? Perfect timing. Okay, what is glaze catcher glue? So there's a barrier in between the pot and the catcher, and it is glaze catcher glue. So this is something that's new for our studio in the last year. We completely thank a fellow potter, Greg Beckman, Moonlit Method Ceramics, for cluing us in on this. We're using all kinds of other methods, and there are all possibilities out there for adhering pots to catchers, but this one is certainly the best as far as what we've seen. And glaze catcher glue has some ingredients in it. I've given you the recipe that I use, which is basically you mix together 1 cup of Elmer's glue with a 1/4 cup alumina hydrate and a 1/4 cup EPK and a little bit of water. It's on the handout. And you get this very viscous glue that contains things that will help the pot separate, right? Have you guys used wax with alumina hydrate? It's like wax with alumina hydrate on steroids and with glue.
Good luck at finding the glue because everybody's using it to
Yeah.
make slime.
We buy 4 gallons of glue at a time now. It's crazy. I never thought I'd buy so much glue. All right, so here's what it looks like. The dark brownish color is from the EPK, which has kind of that color. Alumina hydrate is very white, and when it fires out very white. Basically what you're doing is you're putting a barrier of clay, refractory clay, in between the pot and the catch basin, which will help them release. So it's very thick, and what we want to do...
So you could use this if you're doing something delicate as well, that you want to help the kiln person by preparing it and gluing it together before you...
You could use this, yeah.
We use just glue, just Elmer's glue.
To what are you gluing together, though, before I say you can...
Tiny little things.
Yeah, like onto a tray that they're going to fire on. Yeah.
To go into the kiln.
This would work fine.
You don't want them to have to reassemble
Right.
it or...
Exactly. So we don't, actually, maybe that's a good idea. We should offer that. We have bottles and bottles of Elmer glue in the glaze area for that. And then this is specifically for the crystal pots, but you could use it the same way. Yeah. This is a little gloppier though. If you were working with tiny, teeny things and trying to glue them on somewhere, this might be too viscous and goopy.
You're doing a fruit shape, circle, that sort of thing.
Yeah, on a ring maybe.
On a ring.
So I want a flat-to-flat connection between pot and this guy. I am going to put the glue on the catch basin, and the reason I do that is it's very hard to hold my pot upside down with all that glaze on there. And I actually put as thick a layer as I can of the glaze catcher glue. So I'm like dotting it on here, right? You can almost use like a pastry. Okay, so we're not using it sparingly. Okay, we're putting a lot on. And then we'll take the pot and set it carefully on here. And I have thought too that it would probably be a good idea to actually let that glue dry in position for maybe a minute or two and then put the pot on. So a lot of what is going to happen as you set the pot on there, if it's a very heavy pot, is it's going to all squish out, right? And you actually want as much alumina hydrate and EPK in underneath in the layer. So it may be better to let it dry for a little bit and then put it on there. I'm thinking of that. I will try that on the next class. But usually at this point, I'm so excited about getting the pot on there, I just like, oh, I'm done, I'm ready. Okay.
So when you set it on and some of the glue goes up onto the glaze.
Yeah, I don't worry about it. I mean, if it really went up into the glaze, I would spend some time cleaning it, but it's all going to run off. Okay, so I have pot glued to the catcher. Why is it important to use glue instead of wax? Because when you have a bunch of these lined up and you go to load the kiln, you want to be able to just pick up the pot and set it inside. And often with top loading electric kilns, you're trying to put something down and in. And if the catcher is not actually glued to the pot, it's really hard to get them placed properly and get it centered. So this gives you a chance to load the kiln more easily. You've got the alumina hydrate in between, and then if it works and works really well, the pots actually self-release. So, and that happens probably on a good third of the pieces. So are we ready to see how one releases? Let's finish up our morning here. Let's move to the fire portion of the show. I'm gonna grab that jar and we're gonna take a big risk. Look at this jar. Beautiful. Yay. All right, so ideally, what's supposed to happen is that, like these, I came back a day later after unloading the kiln to load up my things this morning, and I go to pick up the pot and it's already released from the catcher. And you can see the glaze catcher glue is on there, all that white stuff. That is the EPK and the alumina hydrate that I put on right at, when I glued the pot to the catcher. So if you're lucky, they release, and then all you have to do is grind this smooth. Ooh, I have to show you that too, so let's get moving.
So once those bases are fired up, they're dead.
That is done. Yeah, I mean, if I decide I want more crystals on there, I could refire it, but that catch basin is really full, and part of it broke, which happens.
So when you glued that one, did you wait those few minutes, like you said, wait a...
No.
And it worked fine?
And it worked fine. This one is stuck. So, all right, how to do this? I'm feeling like I'm crunched for time, but we have 15 minutes, so we're good. The way that we're going to separate this is to apply heat to the join where the catch basin meets the pot. And if anything, if you're going to aim the flame at it, you want to aim a little lower than the join. The reason I'm recommending that more and more is that if you aim right at the join, you can crack the foot of the pot. And we've had several students where in the process of getting the catch basin off, they crack the bottom of the piece and it no longer holds water, and it's done. So it's sad at the end of this process to have something beautiful that you want to keep that you then crack the bottom.
So, Dan,
Yes.
would you take the top off and put it aside?
I like the drama. Okay. So here I go. What I'm going to do is aim the flame here 20 to 30 seconds. I'm listening for a tink, tink, tink sound. That's the glaze starting to have a little thermal expansion issue, which is what you want. Pretty much heard that. Then you,
Just do it with the torch and not the chisel like where you...
I then bring this up. Voila.
Way better than the grinding method we started with when you started.
Super easy. Yeah, do I start with the chisel?
Greg's
Oh,
workshop, he used a chisel, and if, remember he put a little chisel right at the joint and hit it with a hammer, and
Ah.
that didn't work,
then you go to this.
but you go back to
I go right to that. Maybe we'll start doing that. This one came away pretty beautifully.
why mess with what works?
Yeah. And this will be hot, so when you go to remove this from the wheel, it's hot and sharp. You need gloves or a towel. You set it aside on a non-flammable surface, and then you think about grinding the bottom of this, okay? So that came away very well. I don't have a lot of grinding to do. It came up the side a little bit over here. You can see it's not perfectly even, but it's pretty workable.
On that foot, you cut the foot in, it wasn't just a flat line.
I'm starting to feel like I can do this better. So it's funny, I was doing these at first, but when the catcher doesn't marry to the base that well, you get glaze running inside the foot, and then you have to Dremel that out. So then I started teaching purely flat foot, especially to students, and it's easy. And now I feel like I can take it back the other direction and put a real foot on. But start with flat foot.
But if
easier.
the glaze goes in there, does it go flat or is there a bumpy?
Yeah, I mean, you can end up with a bead of something in there and then they don't sit right, or you have to spend more time. Already, you're spending a lot of extra time per piece, so you're trying to cut down on your labor if you're trying to sell these. All right, this is a grinding disc. I have a reference at the back of the handout on where to get one of these. You can buy them at Clay Planet. I bought just the disc itself from CI Products, which is a diamond core. And these are diamond bit grinding discs that you glue to a bat. And then instead of having an actual grinding wheel in the studio, we just have these now. They work great for crystal, and they work great for all kinds of glaze runs. So you go at a fast speed, you use water. This one's not quite flat. Let me see something here. Wow.
It's like it's taking them down and more better.
Yeah, it's not quite. Do you see that?
Is there something,
Maybe there's a little
maybe there's
plane
something
inside the,
Yeah, I don't know.
Wipe off the-
I only brought one. I should have tested which one I brought to make sure it was flat. I would blame it on students. Students, it's a student thing. I'm using lots of water to lubricate the grinding wheel, and I'm holding onto the pot really tightly. Okay.
this is so cool, because I bought one of those things at Antica, but I haven't ever used it.
Okay, it's starting to smooth out. That's nice. And let me do the edge. So if I'm doing the edge, I hold onto the pot at an angle, and then I run it around slowly. And I'm sure Ben Carter loves me at the moment for making all that noise. It is what it is. Let's see where my towel is. So you're trying to make it so that they are no longer a lethal weapon, basically. You know, as long as it's smooth enough that you can run your finger on there, and then the bottom is smooth, it's not going to hurt a table. I call that done, pretty much. So you get the idea. I know I didn't sign it, and it's a pretty one. So I don't know. Bad on me. I feel it's a huge. For me, this is actually my first covered jar in crystal glaze, and it pretty much worked. So thinking it through, I wanted this rim to be flat. I made an extra lip there so the glaze wouldn't run to the interior. I made this lip flat, and the other thing to think about is that the glaze color, the green, is going to be very different on a flat surface than it is on a vertical, and so you need it to be thinner on a flat surface and thick, really thick over here. So there's some glazing strategy involved to get it to all kind of look alike. I had a few teapots I was trying this on where the teapot lid ended up being an entirely different color than the teapot because of how much glaze I had put on the lid. I was still in the mode of get as much on as you can, and then, oh yeah, it's a flat. Okay. Anyway, all right, that is basically the presentation today, taking you through all the steps. We have time for questions. I have some links at the back to maybe go over. I have recipes, references. If you're going to get started in this, like the easiest way to get started, if you look at the links there, one of the ones that was super helpful to us is that Farah Shimbo digital fire site. So Farah Shimbo is a potter. She does a great job with crystal glazes. She's very easy and approachable as far as reading what she has written about them. And she's got a great glaze called Bori 1, which is a crystal glaze with added boron in it. And we had a whole bunch of really nice pieces 2 years ago, starting with her glaze and her firing schedule. So boron doesn't really give you any color. It's a flux, but it helps the glaze melt at the right temperature, and it takes copper well. You get a nice soft green with 1 or 2% copper. You get a nice soft blue with 1% cobalt. You can get tans with gold crystals with 2% iron, 1% manganese, that kind of thing. So it's a very easy glaze to start with. I recommended from our studio some ones that we got from Greg Beckman. That was the nickel blue on amber. Our white one, this is the example of the titanium white. And teal, I don't have a sample of today, but it's a very nice soft sort of blue crystal, light blue crystal on a light green background. Very pretty. Yeah.
Dan, how heavy did you put it on that great looking platters
On the
dish?
On the platter, what I do to glaze the platter is I'll put the platter on a banding wheel and I'll pour a 1/4 cup of glaze in there, and then I'll spin the banding wheel and spread the glaze out with a brush, just sort of making a big spiral. And I'm going for thicker at the outer edges and a nice single coat at the middle.
So that's the one where it ran in and it got dark?
They all do that.
Sure, because of the force of
Because of the, exactly. So, but you're not going for as much as you can get on. You're going for probably a good medium thickness, whatever that medium thickness is. You'll discover it, right? That's a very subjective term, but medium thickness, not too thin and not overly thick, because it's not going to run off the pot and it's all going to pool in the middle. If you get it on too thick, what I see happening is that you'll get a very dark area in the middle that looks like black syrup with no crystals. And so I've had a lot of students do that. They're in the mindset of get on as much as you can, and they put too much on and they end up with this thing. And often it will actually crack the piece in half in the cooling, because that thickness of glaze changes the compression from inside to outside. They're unequal and it will pull the piece apart. So you want to watch.
Some samples of that.
Yeah. There you go. Other questions, things you're thinking about? Come take a class at Higher Fire in crystalline glazing. We offer it probably 2 or 3 times a year, and we'll probably do another one maybe the summer or the fall. Okay, thank you guys for coming. Thank you.